Captain's horse NEIGHS majestically. Sparkle's horse guards. Royal Guard, King's Guard. The royal palace was alive with excitement, flags fluttering in the gentle breeze, and the distant sound of trumpets echoing across the courtyards. Edward's uniform gleamed under the early light, every button polished to perfection, every strap perfectly aligned. Yet despite his composed exterior, there was a quiet tension simmering beneath the surface. He knew that behind every ceremonial display, there was immense discipline, countless hours of training, and an unspoken bond between man and horse that could never be replaced. At his side stood Valor, a magnificent chestnut horse with a coat that shimmered like copper in the morning sun. Valor's muscles rippled beneath his skin as he shifted his weight, ears twitching to the sounds of the palace awakening. Edward had known Valor for years. Together, they had faced countless parades, drills, and ceremonies. But what made this horse truly special was not just his strength or beauty. It was his intelligence, his loyalty, and the calm assurance he seemed to bring to everyone around him. When Valor neighed softly, it was as if he was speaking directly to Edward, reminding him that no challenge was too great when faced with trust and courage. The parade ground was gradually filling with activity. Soldiers in crimson coats and shining helmets moved with disciplined precision, checking their lines, adjusting their boots, and ensuring that every detail met the royal guard's exacting standards. Young recruits hurried to polish the brass on their saddles and the edges of their swords, their movements sharp but slightly unsteady. Some were nervous, glancing at the more experienced guards with a mixture of admiration and anxiety. Edward observed them quietly, understanding that today would be a test, not just of skill, but of courage, patience, and teamwork. He walked along the line, inspecting each horse and rider. His eyes lingered on the young recruits, noting the small hesitations in their posture and the occasional uncertainty in their hands. He remembered his own first parade many years ago, when his legs had felt like lead and his heart had raced uncontrollably. He remembered the way Valor had stood by him that day, steady and unwavering, giving him the confidence he desperately needed. Now he was the one passing that experience forward, silently teaching the new generation what it meant to serve not just the king, but the very tradition of the royal guard. The palace bells rang, signaling that the king's arrival was near. Edward returned Valor to a calm stance, running a hand over the horse's mane, feeling the warmth and energy beneath his fingers. He spoke softly, as if Valor could understand every word. "Steady, old friend. Everything will be fine. Just remember, we are a team." Valor responded with a low, comforting neigh, a sound that seemed to ripple through the morning air, settling the nerves of both horse and rider. As the king's carriage approached, the parade ground transformed into a scene of organized beauty. Horses shifted in their places, their hooves striking the cobblestones in perfect rhythm. The sunlight reflected off the polished helmets of the guards, creating tiny sparks of brilliance that danced across the ground. Edward's gaze swept over the entire formation, taking in the meticulous alignment of every rider, the perfectly groomed horses, and the disciplined composure of the soldiers. It was a display of strength, pride, and tradition, but Edward knew that behind every perfectly executed maneuver was hours of practice, dedication, and sometimes struggle. Nearby, a young recruit named Thomas fidgeted nervously atop his horse, a striking black stallion that seemed just as anxious as his rider. Thomas had trained for months to be part of the royal guard, but nothing could have fully prepared him for the magnitude of this moment. Edward noticed the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremble in his hands, and the way his eyes darted from one experienced guard to another. Edward had a brief flashback of himself in that same position, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down like a heavy stone. He approached Thomas quietly, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Breathe," Edward said softly, his voice calm but authoritative. Trust your training, trust your horse. You've prepared for this moment. Valor and I are here to guide you. You are ready." Thomas nodded, swallowing hard, but the tension in his body did not completely leave. Edward knew that this was natural. Every soldier, no matter how experienced, had faced moments like this. What mattered was how they responded under pressure. Edward gave Valor a gentle pat, feeling the horse's strength and presence. Together, they were a reminder of the balance between courage and calm, skill and intuition, discipline and heart. The trumpet sounded again, louder this time, announcing the king's imminent arrival. Edward climbed onto Valor with practiced ease, feeling the familiar rhythm beneath him as the horse shifted his weight. The entire parade ground seemed to hold its breath. Guards adjusted their posture, reins in hand, eyes fixed forward. The young recruits tried to mirror their elders, their movements sharper, their expressions determined. Edward could see the mixture of fear and excitement in their eyes, and he knew that this day would leave an impression on them for the rest of their lives. Valor lifted his head, nostrils flaring slightly, and let out a soft neigh that echoed across the square. It was a sound of strength, of readiness, and of unity. Edward straightened in the saddle, feeling a surge of pride. He had seen countless ceremonies, each one a display of tradition and discipline, but today felt different. Today, he was not just leading a parade. He was guiding young minds, showing them the power of dedication, and demonstrating the unspoken bond between rider and horse that defined the royal guard. As the king's carriage rolled into view, Edward's heart beat steadily, a calm contrast to the anticipation rippling through the ground. The guards and horses shifted in precise formation, every movement synchronized, every posture perfect. Edward glanced at Thomas, who now sat a little taller in the saddle, a spark of determination replacing the earlier fear. It was a small victory, but an important one. The parade was not only a demonstration for the king, but also a lesson in courage, patience, and trust, a lesson that would resonate long after the horses had left the square. Edward felt a quiet satisfaction as Valor pawed the ground lightly, ready for the ceremonial march. Today, everything they had trained for would be on display. Yet in the back of his mind, Edward knew that the real triumph was not the applause or the admiration of the king. It was the growth of the young recruits, the silent strength of the horses, and the continuation of a tradition that had stood for centuries. With a deep breath, Edward guided Valor into position, the horse responding instantly, every movement precise and graceful. The sun now fully illuminated the parade ground, casting long shadows of the guards and their horses. The air was electric, filled with anticipation, pride, and the quiet hum of disciplined energy. Edward looked over the formation one last time, seeing the young recruits' faces filled with a mixture of awe and determination, and he knew that they were ready to face the moment together. Valor neighed once more, a sound that carried across the square and seemed to settle every heart. Edward felt a wave of confidence. The day had begun, and with it, a story of courage, discipline, and unity that would be remembered long after the ceremonial horns faded. This was not just a parade. It was a living testament to the bond between man and horse, the dedication of the royal guard, and the power of quiet strength in the face of challenge. And so, as the first steps of the parade echoed across the cobblestones, Captain Edward Sinclair and Valor led the way, ready to face the day, ready to guide the young soldiers, and ready to uphold the honor of the royal guard with every beat of the horse's hooves and every proud breath of the riders. The morning sun climbed higher, casting a warm golden glow over the royal parade ground. Captain Edward Sinclair guided Valor through a careful series of movements, ensuring that every step, every pause, and every adjustment was perfect. The young recruits tried their best to keep pace, their horses prancing nervously under them, ears flicking at every sound. The clash of polished hooves against cobblestones created a rhythmic beat, almost like the heartbeat of the entire palace. It was both beautiful and tense, a dance of discipline and determination. Thomas, the young recruit, struggled to keep his black stallion aligned with the rest of the formation. His hands tightened on the reins, his back stiff, and his eyes darted nervously from the experienced guards to the polished brass and glinting swords all around him. Edward noticed immediately. His heart went out to the boy, remembering how overwhelming it had felt during his first parade. Back then, his own horse had been strong and spirited, and it had taken all his courage to stay calm. Now he knew that Thomas needed guidance, reassurance, and perhaps a small demonstration of trust. Edward leaned slightly toward Valor, whispering encouragement. The horse responded instantly, lowering his head just enough to show calmness, muscles moving in fluid harmony. He was more than a horse. He was a partner, a teacher, and a source of steady strength for anyone near him. The other recruits watched in silent awe as Edward guided Valor through a series of precise turns, circles, and halts. Every movement was elegant yet powerful, a demonstration of the years of training and the unspoken bond between man and horse. The young recruits tried to mimic these movements, but fear and excitement made their coordination falter. Some horses jerked their heads or shifted nervously, creating small ripples of disorder in the formation. Edward's eyes never left them. He moved calmly among the recruits, offering quiet words of advice. Steady hands, deep breath, trust your horse. They can feel your fear or your courage. Show them courage. His voice carried authority but also warmth, and slowly the tense faces of the young soldiers began to relax. Nearby, another horse whinnied sharply, startled by a sudden flutter of a flag in the breeze. A ripple of nervousness spread among the horses, ears twitching, hooves stamping. The young recruits froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Edward's voice rang out, calm and steady. Follow your horse's rhythm. Don't fight them. Lead them with patience, not force. He nudged Valor gently, and the chestnut horse responded, walking smoothly beside the startled stallion, demonstrating the calm that could overcome panic. As Edward continued guiding Valor, he noticed the tension in Thomas easing just slightly. The boy's hands were still firm on the reins, but his shoulders had dropped a little, and his horse's prancing had become more measured. Edward smiled, silently encouraging the progress. The moment was small but significant. It was the beginning of trust being built, a moment where fear began to give way to confidence. The air was filled with the sounds of training, the clip-clop of hooves, the shuffle of soldiers' boots, the occasional sharp command from a senior officer. Yet beneath the noise there was a harmony. Every movement, every breath, every glance carried meaning. Edward knew that this harmony was fragile. It could be broken by one wrong move, one nervous gesture, or one horse sensing panic. That was why discipline, patience, and understanding were as important as strength and skill. Edward led Valor to the center of the formation, demonstrating a series of precise maneuvers for the young recruits to follow. He spoke quietly but firmly, explaining each step. The parade is more than a display. It is trust, it is coordination, and it is respect. Respect for your horse, respect for your comrades, and respect for the tradition you are now part of. The recruits watched, captivated by his poise and the way Valor responded to every subtle cue. Slowly, they began to imitate the movements, learning to listen to their horses rather than force them into action. Meanwhile, Thomas's confidence continued to grow. He noticed how his stallion responded to his own calm guidance, how the horse mirrored his steadiness. The fear that had once clenched his chest loosened, replaced by a quiet focus. Every successful movement, every controlled step, was a small victory, and Edward's approving nod reinforced the lesson. By midday, Thomas was no longer struggling to keep up. He was beginning to lead with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to work with, not against, the powerful creature beneath him. The sun climbed higher, and the heat began to touch the parade ground. Sweat glistened on Edward's brow, on the young recruits' foreheads, and along the necks of the horses. Yet there was no sign of weariness in their eyes. The spirit of the royal guard was strong, a mixture of pride, tradition, and dedication that could not be shaken by fatigue or discomfort. Edward watched with quiet satisfaction. This was the essence of the horse guards: discipline, courage, and unity under pressure. A sudden gust of wind swept across the square, rattling flags and causing dust to rise from the cobblestones. Some horses jumped or shifted nervously. Edward's voice rang out once more, calm but commanding. "Control your breathing. Speak softly to your horse. Show them that you are calm, and they will follow." He patted Valor gently, who responded by shifting his stance with perfect balance and grace. The younger recruits began to understand the lesson without words. Courage and calmness could influence even the most spirited of horses. As the day progressed, the parade training became more complex. Edward guided Valor through intricate patterns, weaving among the other riders with precision and care. The young recruits were challenged to follow, learning to coordinate their movements with both horse and comrades. Mistakes were made, but Edward treated each one as a learning opportunity rather than a failure. "Every misstep is a lesson," he reminded them. "Learn from it, adjust, and continue. Your horse trusts you, and so must you trust yourself." By afternoon, a rhythm had settled over the parade ground. Hooves struck the cobblestones in steady, synchronized beats. The young recruits, once tense and nervous, now moved with measured confidence. Thomas rode with determination, his stallion responding beautifully to every subtle cue. Edward allowed himself a brief moment of pride. This was what leadership looked like, not simply issuing commands, but teaching, guiding, and inspiring trust and courage. Valor's presence remained central to the lesson. Every time a horse faltered or a rider hesitated, Edward relied on Valor's calm demeanor to restore balance. The chestnut horse was more than a participant in the parade. He was a teacher in his own right, demonstrating patience, poise, and the quiet strength that comes from years of experience. The young recruits began to understand that the bond between rider and horse was the foundation of the Royal Guard, a relationship built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Edward gathered the recruits for a brief rest. Horses were given water and riders took a moment to wipe sweat from their brows. Edward spoke quietly but with passion, reinforcing the lessons of the day. "You have made progress," he said. "Not because this is easy, but because you have learned to remain calm under pressure, to listen, and to trust. Every step you take with your horse is a step toward becoming a true guard of the king." Thomas listened intently, feeling a swell of pride and accomplishment. He had faced his fears, learned to control his horse, and discovered the power of calm leadership. Edward's words resonated deeply, planting seeds of confidence that would grow with each future parade, each future challenge, and each moment of responsibility. The day drew to a close with a final demonstration. Edward led Valor in a graceful, precise series of maneuvers, showcasing the harmony between rider and horse, between skill and instinct. The young recruits followed, their horses moving more confidently, their own posture more assured. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the parade ground, but the energy and pride of the horse guards shone brightly. As Edward dismounted and patted Valor's neck, he glanced at the young recruits. They were tired but smiling, a reflection of the lessons they had absorbed. Today had been more than a rehearsal. It had been an experience, a moment of growth, and a demonstration of what it meant to serve with honor. Valor neighed softly, a sound that seemed to echo the pride of every rider, the strength of every horse, and the enduring tradition of the Royal Guard. Edward took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun and the satisfaction of a day well spent. He knew that the challenges were far from over, but the progress made today was undeniable. The young recruits had faced their fears, learned the importance of trust, and witnessed the power of calm leadership firsthand. And most importantly, they had begun to understand the quiet, majestic strength that valor brought to every parade, every drill, and every moment of duty. With a final glance at the formation, Edward led Valor off the parade ground, the chestnut horse moving with effortless grace. The young recruits followed, their own horses calmer, their own spirits stronger, ready to face whatever the next day of training might bring. The sun set behind the palace, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, a perfect reflection of the pride, courage, and unity that defined the Royal Horse Guards. The next morning, the royal parade ground was buzzing with a different kind of energy. Yesterday had been about learning and practice, but today felt like the real test. The sun was just peeking over the palace walls, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of polished leather, freshly fallen hay, and the faint fragrance of the palace gardens. Captain Edward Sinclair arrived early, as always with Valor trotting quietly at his side, hooves clicking rhythmically on the stone. There was an air of expectation, one that was almost tangible, and Edward could feel it pressing on every rider, young and old alike. The young recruits were already gathering, eyes wide, faces full of determination. Thomas was among them, now more confident than the previous day. He adjusted the saddle and checked the reins carefully, his stallion standing patiently, almost sensing the significance of what lay ahead. Edward's sharp eyes swept the line of horses and riders. Every detail mattered: posture, alignment, breathing. The slightest shift in the horse's stance could ripple through the formation and disrupt the harmony. This morning would be different. This morning would test not only skill but nerves, courage, and teamwork. Edward mounted Valor with his usual grace. The chestnut horse responded immediately, muscles coiling and releasing with precision, ears twitching to every sound, nostrils flaring as if he could sense the tension in the air. Valor's presence was reassuring, a steady heartbeat amid the rising nervous energy. He was more than a horse, he was a partner, a guide, and a teacher. Young recruits often looked at him with awe, and even experienced riders felt the quiet confidence that Valor radiated. Edward patted the horse's neck gently, whispering, "Steady, old friend. Today we show them what we've learned." Valor neighed softly in reply, a sound that seemed to settle everyone nearby. The parade began with a series of basic drills, but it quickly became clear that today would not be simple. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the square, rattling the banners and flags above. Horses flicked their ears and stamped nervously. The younger recruits froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Edward's voice cut through the tension, calm yet commanding. "Steady, control your breathing. Lead your horse, don't fight it." He nudged Valor forward slightly, demonstrating how a horse could be guided through distractions without panic. Valor moved smoothly, ears forward, hooves striking the cobblestones in measured rhythm. Thomas's stallion had reacted to the wind as well, tossing his head and prancing nervously. Thomas's heart raced, his hands gripping the reins tightly. He felt fear creeping back, a memory of past mistakes threatening to overwhelm his growing confidence. Edward noticed immediately. With a few soft words and a subtle movement of Valor closer to the boy, he demonstrated calm control. The chestnut horse's poise and authority radiated outward, helping Thomas regain composure. Slowly, the young rider's breathing evened out, and his hands relaxed just enough for the stallion to move with him rather than against him. Edward knew that today would demand more than basic skill. A parade was not merely about lining up and marching. It was about precision, timing, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. The king himself would be watching, and any falter in discipline could spoil the display. Edward had faced these moments many times, but each parade was unique, each challenge unpredictable. He had learned to rely on valor not just as a mount, but as a partner in leadership, a reminder that courage could be shared between man and horse, and that fear could be replaced with focus and trust. The drill moved into more complicated maneuvers. Horses were required to turn in tight circles, shift formations, and maintain absolute synchronization with their riders. Mistakes quickly became noticeable, and some recruits struggled to keep pace. Edward rode along the line, correcting stances, offering words of encouragement, and demonstrating each movement with precision. His calm presence seemed to ripple through the formation, and slowly, the young recruits began to follow, learning not just the mechanics but the rhythm, the flow, and the confidence needed to execute each step perfectly. Suddenly, a louder sound shattered the morning calm, a cartwheel clattering over the cobblestones near the edge of the parade ground. Horses jumped, some bolting slightly before their riders could regain control. The young recruits froze, panic threatening to break the formation. Edward's voice rang out sharply but clearly, "Focus, lead your horse. One step at a time, control, don't fight." He nudged Valor forward. The chestnut horse moved gracefully, weaving between startled horses, his movements confident and assured. Valor's steady presence helped calm the surrounding horses, demonstrating the power of poise under pressure. Thomas's stallion pranced wildly, reacting to the noise and the sudden movement of horses around him. The boy's pulse raced, and for a moment it seemed as though he might lose control. Edward's eyes never left him. With precise movements and soft verbal cues, he guided Valor closer, allowing the younger rider to mirror the calm authority of the chestnut horse. Step by step, Thomas regained control, matching his stallion's rhythm to the beat of the formation. The lesson was clear. Courage could be taught through demonstration, and even fear could be overcome with patience and guidance. The king's arrival was announced by the sounding of trumpets, echoing across the palace grounds. The parade shifted instantly from training to performance. Every rider stiffened, every horse adjusted posture, and the young recruits faced the test of their discipline. The air was charged with anticipation. Edward felt Valor tense briefly, muscles coiling as if to spring, but the horse's composure quickly returned under his gentle guidance. Together, they prepared to lead the formation through the most challenging part of the parade, the turning point where skill and courage would be judged most harshly. Edward guided Valor to the front of the formation. Horses and riders followed in perfect alignment, but even a minor misstep could create chaos. The wind picked up again, fluttering flags and banners, and a sudden shout from a nearby guard startled some of the horses. The younger recruits struggled to maintain balance, and Thomas felt his stallion prance nervously again. Edward leaned close, whispering softly to Valor, who responded instantly, moving forward with steady, measured steps. The chestnut horse's presence calmed the surrounding riders, giving them a moment to breathe and regain focus. The turning point of the parade arrived. Edward led Valor through a series of precise maneuvers that required not only technical skill, but also trust between horse and rider. He demonstrated each step with fluid grace, showing the younger recruits how to anticipate their horses' movements, maintain calm, and synchronize with the others. Thomas, now more confident, followed closely behind. He felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, realizing that his previous struggles had prepared him for this moment. His stallion responded to his every cue, movements smoother and more deliberate than before. Edward's voice carried across the parade ground, calm but commanding, "Trust your horse, trust yourself. Every step matters. One mistake can be corrected with focus and patience." The young recruits absorbed his words, applying them instantly as the formation moved with renewed precision. Valor's neigh rang out, clear and commanding, a signal of authority and calm that spread through the ranks. The sound seemed to settle the hearts of both horse and rider, creating a rhythm that synchronized with every step of the parade. As the maneuvers continued, a small obstacle arose. A wayward horse from the edge of the formation had broken the line slightly. Edward reacted immediately, guiding Valor closer, demonstrating how to restore alignment without force. The young recruits observed closely, learning that true skill involved not just following instructions, but anticipating challenges and responding calmly under pressure. Thomas's eyes widened as he realized the depth of what he was learning. It was no longer simply about riding. It was about leadership, observation, and trust, lessons that went far beyond the parade ground. By midday, the parade had reached a delicate balance. Horses moved with measured rhythm, young recruits showed growing confidence, and Edward felt the subtle shift of tension into controlled focus. Valor continued to lead with elegance and assurance, demonstrating the strength of experience and the quiet power of patience. Every movement was a testament to training, courage, and the deep bond between rider and horse. The young soldiers began to understand that the parade was not just a display. It was a test of character, discipline, and unity. Edward allowed himself a brief moment of pride as he observed Thomas. The young recruit had faced fear, regained control, and now rode with determination and focus. The boy's stallion moved confidently, responding to subtle cues, mirroring the poise of Valor. Edward knew that this was a moment the boy would carry for the rest of his life, a turning point not only in the parade, but in his understanding of courage and trust. As the king watched from his balcony, the formation executed the final sequence of maneuvers. Every horse and rider performed with precision, every motion a reflection of training, discipline, and unity. The young recruits, once hesitant and nervous, now moved with a quiet confidence, inspired by Edward's leadership and Valor's calm authority. The parade ground shimmered with the energy of dedication, courage, and the majestic presence of the Royal Horse Guards. Edward guided Valor through the final steps, a graceful conclusion to a morning filled with challenges and lessons. The chestnut horse neighed once more, a sound that resonated across the square, symbolizing not just victory but growth, trust, and achievement. The young recruits followed, learning that courage was not the absence of fear but the ability to act with composure despite it. By the end of the morning, the parade had reached its climax. Edward dismounted, patting Valor's neck with affection and pride. He glanced at the young recruits, their faces flushed with excitement and satisfaction. They had faced their fears, learned to trust, and discovered the strength that comes from unity and discipline. Valor's presence had guided them, teaching lessons that went far beyond riding, lessons of courage, patience, and leadership that would shape them as both soldiers and individuals. The sun was high in the sky now, casting bright light over the parade ground. Edward knew that this day would be remembered, not just as a test of skill, but as a turning point in the lives of the young recruits. They had faced challenges, responded with courage, and experienced the power of trust between rider and horse. Valor's neigh echoed one last time, a majestic sound that seemed to carry the pride, strength, and honor of the royal guard across the entire palace grounds. The afternoon sun blazed high over the royal parade ground, turning the polished cobblestones into a glimmering mosaic of light. The air was thick with anticipation as Captain Edward Sinclair guided Valor to the front of the formation. Today was no ordinary training session or rehearsal. This was the moment when all the practice, discipline, and courage would be put to the test. The king himself had arrived, standing majestically on the balcony, his gaze sweeping over the rows of guards, horses, and young recruits. The palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting to witness the skill, precision, and grace of the Royal Horse Guards in full display. The parade ground was alive with movement. Horses shifted, hooves striking the cobblestones in perfect rhythm. Edward's eyes scanned the formation, ensuring that every rider and horse was poised and ready. Young recruits like Thomas moved with growing confidence, their earlier nervousness replaced with focus and determination. Thomas's black stallion pranced lightly, responding to the subtle cues from the young rider, who had begun to understand the delicate balance of leadership, patience, and trust required to guide a horse with calm authority. Edward could feel the energy of the moment surging through the square. Every horse was aware of the tension in the air, ears flicking, muscles coiling, and eyes alert. Valor, as always, remained composed, a pillar of calm amid the rising excitement. The chestnut horse's presence was magnetic, radiating confidence and reassurance. Edward gently patted Valor's neck and whispered, "Now, old friend. It's time to show them everything we've worked for." Valor responded with a soft, majestic neigh that carried across the parade ground, a sound that seemed to settle even the most nervous horses and riders. The parade began with a series of precise maneuvers, each step echoing the hours of training that had gone into perfecting every movement. The young recruits followed closely behind, striving to mirror the poise and skill of the more experienced guards. The formation moved smoothly, a flowing pattern of disciplined grace. But the real test was yet to come, the turning point where precision, courage, and composure would all be challenged simultaneously. A sudden, sharp noise erupted from the edge of the parade ground. A dropped banner clattered to the stones, startling a few horses near the perimeter. Some of the younger recruits froze, while others' horses pranced nervously, ears pinned back. Edward acted immediately, leaning slightly toward Valor, who responded instantly, stepping forward with measured grace. The chestnut horse moved through the formation, his calm authority radiating outward. The young riders began to mirror his movements, finding their own rhythm amidst the chaos. Thomas felt his heart hammer in his chest as his stallion shied slightly at the sound. Fear threatened to overwhelm him, but he remembered Edward's lessons. Trust your horse, stay calm, and lead with confidence. Edward's voice rang out steady and commanding, one step at a time. Control, don't fight. Trust yourself and your horse. Valor neighed once more, a clear, strong sound that seemed to ripple across the square, settling Thomas and giving him the courage to guide his stallion back into rhythm with the formation. The king watched closely, his sharp eyes noticing every subtle movement. This was not just a test of skill, but a demonstration of leadership, courage, and unity. Edward led Valor through the next series of maneuvers with effortless precision, every hoofbeat measured, every shift of weight exact. The young recruits followed, some more confidently than others, their faces reflecting determination and concentration. The parade ground echoed with the harmonious sound of hooves, the disciplined clatter a testament to months of rigorous training and unwavering focus. Then came the most challenging part of the parade, the grand turn. It required every horse and rider to move in perfect alignment while executing a series of intricate patterns. One small mistake could throw off the entire formation. Edward guided Valor forward, his voice calm yet firm. "Now, remember your training. Focus on your rhythm, follow the horse in front, and trust your instincts." Valor responded instantly, moving gracefully into position, muscles flowing in perfect harmony. The chestnut horse's poise and strength inspired confidence in those around him, particularly the young recruits struggling to keep pace. Thomas felt the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. His heart pounded and sweat dripped down his brow, but he focused on his stallion's movements. He felt the horse respond to his subtle cues, moving in sync with the rest of the formation. For the first time, he truly understood what Edward had been teaching him. Leadership was not about force or fear. It was about trust, patience, and quiet courage. Step by step, he guided his horse through the pattern, each movement more precise than the last. As the formation completed the grand turn, a sudden shout from a guard near the perimeter startled a nearby horse. It bolted slightly, knocking against another, creating a ripple of panic that threatened to disrupt the entire parade. Edward reacted instantly, leaning forward on Valor, guiding him with subtle movements to stabilize the formation. Valor moved through the startled horses like a calm river flowing through a storm, restoring order and rhythm. The younger recruits mirrored the chestnut horses' movements, regaining focus and balance under Edward's quiet guidance. The moment of highest tension had arrived, the final sequence of maneuvers before the king's inspection. Edward signaled to Valor, who responded instantly, moving into the lead position. The chestnut horse's movements were fluid, confident, and elegant, a perfect example of discipline and training. The young recruits followed closely behind, their horses matching every step, ears forward, eyes alert. Thomas's heart raced, but he felt a surge of pride as his stallion moved gracefully, responding to his every cue. The lesson of courage and trust was now fully realized. Edward guided the formation through the final steps, weaving between horses with expert precision. Every movement was a testament to months of practice, patience, and unwavering discipline. Valor's neigh rang out again, a clear, commanding sound that carried across the parade ground. It was the signal of triumph, a sound that resonated with the pride of the Royal Guard and the dedication of every rider who had faced challenges and conquered them. The young recruits, once nervous and unsure, now rode with quiet confidence. They had faced their fears, followed Edward's guidance, and witnessed the power of calm leadership in action. Thomas's eyes shone with a mixture of exhilaration and accomplishment. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with composure despite it. His stallion moved with elegance and strength, mirroring the lessons of trust and patience he had absorbed from Edward and Valor. The king's applause rang out from the balcony, a clear acknowledgement of the skill, precision, and courage displayed on the parade ground. Edward guided Valor to a final halt, chestnut horse standing tall, mane gleaming in the sunlight. The young recruits completed the formation, their horses proud and alert. The parade had reached its climax, a display of unity, discipline, and the quiet majesty of the Royal Horse Guards. Edward dismounted, patting Valor's neck with affection. The chestnut horse neighed one last time, a sound that carried the pride, strength, and tradition of the Royal Guard across the palace grounds. Thomas and the other young recruits gathered around, faces flushed with excitement, hearts still racing from the intensity of the moment. They had learned lessons far beyond the mechanics of riding. They had experienced courage, trust, and the power of calm leadership under pressure. Edward surveyed the parade ground, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Today had been more than a demonstration. It had been a test of character, resilience, and the enduring bond between horse and rider. Valor had led not just with strength, but with wisdom, teaching the young recruits the importance of patience, focus, and calm authority. The lessons learned today would remain with them forever, shaping not only their skills as riders but their character as members of the Royal Guard. As the sun began its descent, casting long golden shadows across the cobblestones, Edward guided Valor off the parade ground. The young recruits followed, their horses calmer, their spirits lifted, and their hearts filled with pride. The challenges of the day had tested them, but they had emerged stronger, more confident, and ready to continue the legacy of the Royal Horse Guards. Valor's final neigh echoed across the square, a lasting reminder of courage, discipline, and the majestic presence that defined the life of the Royal Guard. The day had reached its climax, but the lessons of trust, courage, and leadership would resonate far beyond the parade ground. Edward knew that each young recruit had grown, that every horse had been tested, and that the bond between rider and horse had been strengthened in ways that could not be measured. Valor, majestic and steady, had been at the heart of it all, a living symbol of strength, loyalty, and the quiet power that comes from discipline and trust. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the palace walls, painting the royal parade ground in warm shades of gold and amber. The long day of parades, drills, and demonstrations had come to an end, yet the energy in the square still lingered. Captain Edward Sinclair stood tall atop Valor, his chestnut horse's muscles rippling gracefully as he shifted beneath him. The crowd of young recruits had gathered around, exhausted but proud, their horses pawing at the ground and stamping lightly, still buzzing from the excitement and challenge of the day. Edward allowed himself a brief moment to survey the parade ground, taking in the scene with quiet satisfaction. Every recruit had grown, every horse had performed admirably, and every moment of fear or uncertainty had been transformed into a lesson in courage, discipline, and trust. He glanced at Thomas, whose face shone with accomplishment, eyes bright and full of admiration for the chestnut horse that had led them through the day. Thomas's black stallion stood calmly, nostrils flaring as if catching the pride and energy that radiated through the square. The king remained on the balcony, observing the final moments with a satisfied expression. Edward knew that the royal audience was not merely evaluating skill, it was witnessing the spirit, unity, and perseverance of the Royal Horse Guards. Every perfectly executed maneuver, every subtle signal between rider and horse, told a story of dedication and tradition. Edward guided Valor to the center of the formation, where the young recruits had lined up. The chestnut horse's presence was commanding yet comforting, a living symbol of the lessons learned that day. Edward dismounted gracefully, patting Valor on the neck. The horse responded with a low, steady neigh, a sound that seemed to resonate across the entire parade ground, calming the last few restless horses and bringing a sense of closure to the day. The young recruits gathered around Edward and Valor, forming a small circle. Their faces were flushed with pride and relief. They had faced the challenges of the morning and afternoon, navigated moments of fear and uncertainty, and emerged stronger, more confident, and more capable. Thomas stepped forward hesitantly, bowing his head slightly in respect. "Thank you, Captain," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. I never thought I could do it, but Valor and you showed me how." Edward smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Thomas. It's the ability to act despite fear. Today you showed that in every step you took. You listened to your horse, you trusted yourself, and you followed your training. That is what makes a true guard." The other recruits nodded, sharing similar experiences. Some had faltered, but each had learned the same lesson. Patience, trust, and calm leadership could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Edward had guided them, but it was Valor who had led the way. The chestnut horse's steady presence, his ability to respond to subtle commands, and his quiet strength had been a living example of discipline and courage. The young riders understood, perhaps for the first time, that leadership could be gentle yet firm, quiet yet commanding, and always rooted in trust. Edward guided Valor to a small fountain at the edge of the parade ground, allowing the horse to drink while he spoke to the young recruits. "Today was not just about parades," he explained. "It was about learning how to face challenges, how to lead, and how to trust your instincts. Every horse has a personality, every rider a responsibility. The lessons you've learned today will follow you far beyond this square. Remember them, and remember the bond you share with your horse." The recruits listened attentively, absorbing every word. Thomas looked at Valor, admiration shining in his eyes. He realized that the lessons of the day went far beyond riding techniques or marching in formation. They were lessons about courage, patience, responsibility, and the quiet strength that comes from trust and understanding. He reached out, gently running a hand along the horse's mane, feeling the warmth and energy beneath his fingers. Valor neighed softly in response, a gentle acknowledgement that seemed to convey approval and pride. Edward turned his attention to the formation as a whole. The young recruits had improved immensely since the morning, their movements now more precise, their posture confident, and their composure steady. He felt a swell of pride for each one of them. The lessons had been difficult, the challenges real, and the pressure immense, yet they had risen to the occasion. The parade had tested not only their skill but also their courage and ability to work as a team. Every mistake had been corrected, every falter transformed into a learning moment. The king descended from the balcony, walking slowly across the parade ground toward the formation. Edward stepped forward with valor at his side, leading the chestnut horse with calm authority. The king observed the formation carefully, nodding approvingly at the precision, discipline, and unity displayed by the guards. His gaze lingered on Valor, whose calm and commanding presence had become a focal point of the day. Edward bowed slightly, acknowledging the king's attention, and then gestured to the young recruits. "You have done well," the king said, his voice carrying across the square, "not only in skill but in courage, discipline, and respect. The Royal Horse Guards have a proud tradition, and today you have honored that tradition with every step, every movement, and every decision. Remember the lessons learned here. Let them guide you in the years to come." The young recruits listened, hearts swelling with pride. Thomas felt a deep sense of accomplishment, realizing that he had been part of something larger than himself, something that carried history, tradition, and honor. He looked at Edward, silently expressing gratitude for the guidance and mentorship he had received. Edward smiled, patting Valor's neck once more, feeling the warmth of the chestnut horse beneath his hand. Together, they had led the young recruits through a day of challenge, growth, and achievement. Edward then gathered the recruits for a final lesson. "Today has ended," he said, "but the lessons are lifelong. Courage, trust, patience, and discipline will guide you through every challenge, whether on the parade ground or in life. Valor has been your teacher today, showing you the power of quiet strength. Remember that leadership is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is the calm presence, the gentle guidance, and the trust you inspire that make the greatest difference." The recruits nodded solemnly, absorbing his words. They knew that what they had experienced was more than a parade. It was a turning point in their lives. Each step they had taken with their horse, each moment of fear overcome, and each lesson absorbed would remain with them forever. Thomas smiled, feeling a sense of belonging, pride, and newfound confidence. He looked at Valor once more, brushing the horse's mane gently, and whispered, "Thank you." Valor neighed softly in reply, as if understanding every word. Edward walked through the formation one last time, inspecting the horses and riders. He gave a nod of approval to each young recruit, acknowledging the effort, determination, and growth he had witnessed. The once nervous faces were now filled with confidence, each rider standing taller, their eyes brighter and their movements more assured. The chestnut horse, Valor, moved calmly beside Edward, muscles relaxed, head held high, ears alert. Together, they represented the pinnacle of discipline, strength, and the quiet majesty of the Royal Horse Guards. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parade ground, Edward led Valor and the young recruits off the square. The day had been long, intense, and challenging, but it had also been transformative. The lessons learned, the courage gained, and the trust built between horse and rider would stay with them forever. Edward felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the young recruits had grown not only as riders, but as individuals, prepared to carry forward the tradition and honor of the Royal Guard. The royal parade ground began to empty as the sun set, leaving behind a sense of calm and accomplishment. Edward and Valor paused at the edge, taking in the scene one last time. The horses were grazing, the young recruits chatting quietly among themselves, and the palace stood majestically against the twilight sky. Edward ran a hand through Valor's mane, feeling the steady warmth and strength beneath his fingers. "Well done, old friend," he whispered. "Today, we made a difference." Valor neighed softly in response, as if agreeing, a final note of triumph, pride, and quiet celebration. Edward watched as the young recruits mounted their horses and began the ride back to the stables, each step filled with newfound confidence. Thomas rode beside him, a smile on his face, and a spark in his eyes that spoke of courage, pride, and the lessons that would guide him for years to come. Edward knew that the story of this day, the challenges faced, the fears overcome, and the triumphs earned, would be remembered not only by the young recruits but also by every horse and rider who had been part of the Royal Horse Guards. As darkness fell, the parade ground grew quiet, leaving only the memory of hooves striking cobblestones, the echo of valor's majestic neigh, and the sense of accomplishment that hung in the air. Edward and Valor stood together for a moment, partners in leadership, witnesses to growth, and symbols of the enduring strength, courage, and discipline of the Royal Guard. The day had ended, but its lessons would last a lifetime. Every young recruit had learned the power of trust, the importance of patience, and the quiet courage that comes from discipline and preparation. They had seen firsthand the majesty of valor, the strength of leadership, and the pride of being part of a tradition that stretched back for centuries. Edward smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than a parade. It was a story of growth, courage, and the enduring bond between rider and horse, a story that would be remembered for years to come.